welcome to our LPFM webinar. I know we're a few minutes delayed, so sorry for the delay, and again, thank you for joining us. My name is Parul Desai, and I am an attorney advisor in the audio division of the Media Bureau. Joining me are my very smart colleagues, Gary Lowers, who is an engineer with the audio division, and Conrad Herling, who is an analyst with our division. Our agenda for today for the webinar, we'll quickly go over what is a low-power radio. We'll also discuss the LPFM channel finder, and we'll go through how to use the LPFM channel finder to find out if there is a frequency available in your community. We'll also go through how to create a CDBS account, which you'll need to electronically file your application. Next, we'll go through the form itself, Form 318, which is the LPFM construction permit application. We'll also, at the end, talk about what happens once the application window closes, and then finally, we'll take as many questions as we can today, and you can send your questions to lpfm@fcc.gov, or if you're using Twitter, hashtag LPFM questions. So first, I'll turn this over to Gary, who will walk you through the LPFM channel finder.
Thank you, Parul. I'm going to direct everybody to the channel finder through the FCC's main website, fcc.gov. From the home page, if you simply type in the address bar at the end of the slash LPFM, and that will take you to the FCC's low power FM web page, and that has all the information that you would need to find out about the LPFM service. But specifically, what I'm doing is going to scroll down to the channel finder. Click on that link, and it takes us to the channel finder page and some introductory information. The channel finder uses your location, your proposed location of your new station, and we need to type in the coordinates and latitude and longitude in degrees, minutes, and seconds. And as it says on the above the coordinate boxes, the coordinates have to be in NAD 27. And if you determine your coordinates by other means, you need to convert that to NAD 27, because that's what we use for broadcast work. And there's many ways to convert. In fact, there are some converters in the going back to the FCC website and use tools and go to radio tools, and we have all kinds of converters there. I'm going to start with the first example of using the channel finder at the station in Prescott, Arizona, and I'm going to type in the coordinates. And see what we get. And I'm going to leave the defaults. We have some defaults further down in this program. I'm going to leave them as they are and just run the program. And the result comes up as passed and a little green dot. And what we see here is two channels that look like they meet the spacing requirements for an LPFM station at this location. And this is something you can take as initial information. We don't recommend that you take this and say these are the channels that I can use, that I have. That there should be some more investigation to see if these channels are suitable for the location, and that would require a little bit more engineering study. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do three analysis here, three channel finders. The first one found us some channels. The next two are going to be no channels found, and then we have a conditional situation where there could be channels available. The next location I'm doing is generally in Huber Heights, Ohio, it looks like, and I'm going to put in those coordinates. And see what results we get. on this one. Hit enter, or you can scroll down and there's a submit data button. And now we get a red dot and it says fail. So what this is telling us is that there are no channels that fit to the LPFM spacing rules, and below this fail paragraph there's a little information, blocker information if you want to call it that. It gives you an idea of what stations and what distances are preventing this location from having some channels. Just as an example, the first station, WIMT, indicates the distance is 89.9. The spacing rule for that type of station has to be 97 kilometers, so that's why that is short spaced and it wouldn't work, and there's other examples here. So the next thing to do is I'm going to back up. I'm going to enter the same coordinates, but now I'm going to change a few items and see if we can use what is called conditional channels. The latest rule change allows second adjacent short spacings. So that's one of the things we're going to check for. So this is here again the same coordinates, and I'm also going to click a show list of stations. This just gives kind of raw data of what was looked at. The next thing I'm going to in special search options, I'm going to click exclude second adjacent channel distance separation requirements to authorized stations. I'm also going to click exclude on this next selection for IF channels, which really could have done in the beginning because the IF spacing rules have changed, but it usually doesn't affect results too much. So anyway, hit enter or submit this data. This is the same location we just did that had the red fail. Now we get a yellow conditional, and it looks like there's one channel 282 104.3 that could be used, and the reason it comes up on this conditional analysis is that it's short spaced to a station, and in order to use this channel you would have to submit an engineering exhibit or showing with your application, and you would have to demonstrate that there's no interference to the station, in this case 2 stations on channel that is short spaced. I'm sorry, the channel 282 box. A consideration when you use these conditional second adjacent short space stations is you may have interference coming into you even though you're properly spaced on the code channel. So this box is telling you that possibly you might have some interference, and these are considerations you need to make when you decide on what channel you want to use. Even though a channel is properly spaced, or you could get a second adjacent waiver, the channel you select still may not be adequate or may get interference and cause you problems. So this box is telling you, in this case, there are 2 stations that are right at the edge of distance to receiving interference. So something to consider. And that's pretty much it. The channel finder also gives you an indication of your distance to AM stations. This is not something you need to consider initially, and also airports, or if your structure that your antenna is mounted on requires FCC or FAA analysis. And like I said, these are not things you need to worry about immediately, but they would have to be taken care of before your construction permit can be granted, but they don't stop you. And last but not least, I checked the show all data, and this will give you an idea through all the channels in the FM band what the relationships were between your location and all the stations around you. So you can use this, and if you have any questions on a certain channel, what were the relationships to other stations, you get this. And it's a lot of information, but it allows you to at least get a start if you have to do some additional engineering. And that's pretty much it. That's the channel finder, and from here I'm going to give it to Conrad, and Conrad's going to enter the CVBS.
Okay, so to apply what Gary has just been talking about you need to actually create a CDBS, what's called a CDBS account. It's basically the electronic filing account. And we'll go back to the main site of the FCC.gov. We'll go to the fourth tab, which is entitled Business and Licensing. And then the third option down from there says Online Filing. When you get to that next page, you're going to go down to the fifth paragraph, and these will become words that you will probably memorize after seeing them so many times. Broadcast radio and television electronic filing system, parenthetically CDBS. Click on that paragraph heading. That's the link. And you're going to come to a page that says FCC Encyclopedia, followed by Media Bureau Filing Systems and Databases. Following that, you'll see a series of public access searches. You're going to bypass those searches, and you're going to come down again to that magical phrase, CDBS Electronic Filing System. And then it directs you, as it says, direct to account login. And here is where you will click the link that says, appropriately enough, CDBS account login. Now, you'll see this is where you would plug in your account ID and password, and that you don't have one. You're going to do what the system is telling you to do, and that's to create a new account. All right, and for lack of a better example, we're going to use, hurling is not hurling. All right, for those with mild bits of humor, that might be funny. But then we'll go on to the mailing address and your basic contact info. And don't worry, the lettering will all become capitalized. It's really important to note also, when you're going about this process, remember this is fundamental, that low-power FM radio operators, stations, licensees are not individuals. They are nonprofit entities. They are not individuals. So we're just plugging in the usual information you would plug in basically to any form with your contact info. The password that you're going to use needs to be between 8 and 12 characters. If you use any letters, the letters are case sensitive. After you do that, then we'll create the account, and you'll see that it has created an account number. Store this number. Make sure you can easily access it, because there will be times that you'll be breaking up this process and you need to take a break. You need to be able to get back to this very important information. This is the newly created account ID, your electronic filing account. So we're going to save that for the purpose of this demonstration, then continue, and then we will be back to the login page. Then we're going to plug in that newly created account number and the password that you have created, and then log in. And that's going to take you to what's called the main menu page. At this point, what you want to do before you do anything else is actually click on this option that says Account Maintenance, right below your account number. And once you get here, you're going to go to where it says Account Type. There'll be a little arrow that's pointing downwards. Click on that arrow. Go to the second option, which is Contact Rep. That's going to be the person that the commission would get in touch with if we needed to. And then you will continue. And then here, the name of the person will be obviously an individual. And we're just going to give my name for today's purpose. But again, the organization name is not an individual, it's the name of the entity. Then your email address. And again, the usual information. But again, this would be the information we would need here at the Commission if we needed to correspond with you. And after we've done that, we will update the account, and then we will return to the main menu page. All right, now at this point, we're going to slide down to the title of the form for the low power FM radio, and that's FCC Form 318. We'll click on that link that represents that type of application. We'll just call this, for today's purpose, of Form 318, or we'll call it LPFM, and we're going to use Gary's first example of Prescott, Arizona. The purpose of the application is fairly self-evident. It's a news station. So we'll click there, and then from here we'll enter. Let me just go back to that because I want to note that in the process of filing the application and when it's being reviewed here at the Commission, if there needs to be, and again, this is where the contact person comes into play, an amendment something that needs to be corrected or addressed, then this is where in the pre-form, when you're about that process, that you would click where it says appropriately enough amendment to pending application. So let's enter. And it should pull up a lot of the information, if not all the information we've just plugged in. So we have the name of the applicant. It's for a new station. We're going to plug in the name of the community that's being applied for, which is Prescott, Arizona. And then we will validate this. I want to note that you can simplify the process. Often you can save and then validate, but with validating, you can actually accomplish 2 steps with 1 step. I often tell callers it's like shampoo and conditioner in 1 bottle. If you validate, it will do both the saving and the validating. After you do that, the screen automatically will shoot up to the top, come back down to the bottom of that page, click on Menu, and then what is reflected here is really a progress report. It's divided in half, the bottom half of which says work in progress. Those would be sections of the application that you would begun or completed work on. And then those sections that you've not begun work on, appropriately enough, are identified as new sections. And at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to turn it back over to Parul, who's going to get into Section 2 for us and go through that.
Thanks, Conrad.
You're welcome.
So now we're going to go through the actual application, which is the Form 318 application. So Section 2 deals with the legal questions, and the first question is a certification question, and this is basically to ensure that the applicant has answered all the questions based on the instructions and the worksheets, and so we highly recommend that you also look at the instructions to the application when filling this out. And this is especially important because our review of the application and the licensing is based on the applicant's accurately answering the questions and the reliability of your certification. So please do read the forms and the instructions to the form, and we'll mark yes for our purposes here that we are certifying. The next question is regarding eligibility. And in this question, you are certifying that you are eligible to own and operate an LPFM station. Just check the one box that applies to you, and you'll check no for the other boxes. In the case where you do mark yes, you will have to provide an explanatory exhibit. So I'll just quickly go over your 3 options. A is a nonprofit educational organization, in which case you have to have an educational goal or purpose, and you'll be using the station to provide programming to further your educational purpose. As Conrad mentioned earlier, individuals cannot qualify as an organizational applicant. Another question that we often get is whether or not you have to be a 501c3. And the answer is no, you do not have to be a 501c3. As long as you're organized as a nonprofit educational institution, corporation, or entity under your state's laws, you are eligible to apply for an LPFM license. For our purposes, we will mark yes for this option. And our exhibit for this would provide detailed descriptions of the nature of our programming that we'll provide. We'll also have to submit copies of the documents that establish our nonprofit status, such as corporate charters or articles of incorporation. This is important because if you do not provide this information, your application may be subject to dismissal. Another option to be eligible is if you're a tribe or a tribal organization. A tribe is any Indian or Alaska Native tribe, band, nation, pueblo, village, or community which is recognized by the federal government. A tribal organization is a private nonprofit entity such as a nonprofit foundation, corporation, or association that is 51% or more owned or controlled by a tribe or tribes. Here, too, the exhibit should provide detailed descriptions of the non-commercial nature of your proposed station programming. Applicants that are tribal organizations should explain which tribe or tribes own or control them. Additionally, applicants that are tribal organizations, whether or not you're incorporated, must submit complete copies of the documents establishing your nonprofit status. You could also be eligible if you're going to provide public safety radio service. Under this criteria, the applicant must not be organized for profit, must use the LPFM station for public safety purposes, and the services that you provide must not be made commercially available to the public. Applicants that are not non-government entities must submit copies of the documents establishing their nonprofit status. And so we'll mark no here. And not applicable for question 2C since we are not a public safety service. Normally we would file an exhibit. You would do that by clicking Exhibit 2. You'd fill out the information here. We're not going to do the exhibit today, so we'll go back to menu. But I should note that when you don't provide information such as the exhibit, at the end, you will get an error message saying that you need to provide an exhibit. So next we'll go on to question 3, which is parties to the application. And this question is important so that you can identify all the individuals who may be subject to the FCC's ownership rules. And we'll talk a little bit more about the ownership rules in question 5 because that's where this will become more relevant. So what is a party to the application? So a party to the application includes any individual or entity whose ownership or positional interest in the applicant is what we call attributable. So an attributable interest is basically an ownership interest that a party has with relation to the applicant, which will give that party with the interest a degree of influence or control over the applicant sufficient to implicate the Commission's multiple ownership rules. I would highly recommend that you review pages 4 to 6 for more detailed explanations of a party to the application based on the way your organization is structured. In some cases, you may also want to consult a lawyer, especially if you have a more complicated organizational structure. But for one example, and this is the most common example, most applicants are organized as non-stock corporations or another non-stock entity. In that case, for this question, the party to the application would be the applicant, the officers, directors, and governing board members of the applicant. If you also have a parent or subsidiary, then you also must list the parent and subsidiary and its members as parties to the application. So here we will, for example, provide 2 names of officers. So the percentage of votes, I'm going to write 50, but this is, it doesn't have to be equal amount of percentage of votes among all the members. It could be 75-25. That's an internal issue, but for our purposes, we'll say 50. I think in many cases, there may not be any assets, and in our case, we don't have any assets, so we're going to type in 0. We'll hit validate. We're going to add one more officer as a party to the application, and we're going to hit add copy to do that. Again, 0 assets. So in some cases you may, in many cases you may have more than 2 parties, but for our purposes we'll just say 2 parties of interest and then go back to menu. And we're still in, I'm sorry, we're still in the legal section. So we've entered the parties' information, and in question 3B, you have to certify that any interests that you have not listed in section 3A are not attributable. For our purposes, we've listed every relevant person, so we're going to say not applicable. If you answer no, you will have to provide an exhibit and explain why those interests were not listed. So next we're going to go to community-based criteria. In this section you have to certify that you are local to be eligible for an LPFM application, so you must check yes to one of these certifications to be deemed a local applicant. These are pretty self-explanatory, so we'll just go with we are local in a top 50 market. Mark no for the others. So section 5 is regarding ownership interests. Question 5A is in reference to the ownership of other LPFM stations. The general rule is you can only own one LPFM station. But there are 2 exceptions. Tribes or tribal organizations can own up to 2 LPFM stations, while public safety entities are not limited in the number of LPFM stations that you can own. So we will certify here, yes, that we do not own any other LPFM station. Section 5B is in reference to ownership of other media interests, such as a full-power radio station or a full-power TV station or even a low-power TV station. In general, the rules prohibit you from owning another media interest. There are some exceptions, however. So one exception is that you can own up to 2 FM translator stations under certain conditions. If you do own a translator, please review 47 CFR section 73.860B. You do have to meet certain conditions to be able to own a translator and an LPFM station. And additionally, as we just noted, a tribe or tribal organization can have 2 LPFM stations, so they are allowed to own up to 4 translator stations. So we here in 5B will certify that we do meet the rules, because we either don't own another media interest or you fall under the exception, the translator exception. There are a few more exceptions that we should go over. You can also certify yes in this question if you are an accredited school that has a non-student run full power broadcast station, as long as the LPFM station that you're applying for will be managed and operated by the students of the accredited school. If that applies to you, you can again answer yes in the certification. There's another 2 exceptions that are also relevant for this question. If you as an applicant or a party to the application does have an interest in another media outlet, such as, like we mentioned earlier, a full power station or a television station, the applicant or the party to the application can divest the interest prior to the LPFM beginning its operations. If you decide that you do fall under this exemption, you must mark no for the question, and you must provide an exhibit explaining the media interest that you hold and that you intend to divest that media interest. The final exception relevant to this question is if the applicant is a local chapter of a larger national organization, including schools. There are many applicants that are local school campuses that are part of a larger university. In that case, if your national organization, if the national organization owns a media interest, such as another broadcast station, the local chapter may apply for the LPFM license, but only if the local chapter is separately incorporated and has a distinct local presence and mission. If you're relying on this exemption, again, mark no, and you must file an exhibit explaining how you meet the exceptions for that. So those are so there are a number of exceptions, but for our purposes, we are going to certify yes that we do not own any other media interest. Section 5C is only relevant if you have immediate family members that may hold other broadcast interest. For this, please use worksheet number 1 that's available in the instructions to determine whether or not you have family members that, if you do have family members that hold media interest, and whether or not they comply with the FCC rules. For our purposes, we'll certify that we don't have any interest. And question D is also only relevant if there are non-party investors and creditors. This question is relevant if the applicant is an LLP or LLC that seeks to insulate its members from attribution, or the applicant has non-party investors such as creditors, and the investors have the capacity to influence decisions of the applicant. Again, please use worksheet 1 if this is relevant to you to ensure that you can certify yes. Section 6 deals with character issues. So this question only applies to those parties that are listed in question 3, and if those parties have previously applied for a broadcast license. If neither the applicant nor any party to the application has previously applied for a license, then check yes, and we'll check yes for our purposes. If, however, the response is no, you must submit an exhibit that includes an identification of the party who has had the interest in all the matters and issues that were involved. You should also fully explain why the unresolved character issue is not an impediment to the grant of the application. Question 7, adverse findings. This question applies if any party to the application has had an adverse finding in a non-broadcast matter. In responding to this question, you should consider any relevant adverse finding that occurred within the past 10 years. If the response is no, meaning you can't certify that no adverse finding has been made, you must file an exhibit explaining the matters involved. I should note that this is not, answering no is not an automatic disqualifier. This is done on a case-by-case basis to determine if this will be an issue. In our case, we will certify yes. Question 8 is regarding unlicensed operation. You must certify that no party to the application has engaged in any manner of an unlicensed operation of a station. We will mark yes. If you mark no to this question, this is an automatic disqualifier and your application will not be able to move forward. Question 9 is the anti-drug abuse certification, and you must certify that no party to the application is subject to denial of federal benefits pursuant to the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which denies benefits to individuals convicted of the distribution or possession of controlled substances. This is relevant because federal benefits do include FCC authorizations, and we will hit yes for that. So the next section is point system factors. So these are essentially bonus points that will be used in the case of conflicting, or what we call mutually exclusive applications, which happens when more than one application is filed in the same window and the operation of the stations would cause interference to each other. So the first option for a point is established community presence. To qualify for this point as a nonprofit educational organization, this means you have had to have had an established local community presence for at least 2 years in the community you propose to serve prior to the date of this application. A nonprofit educational organization claiming a point under this criteria must provide documentation which includes information such as the date of commencement of the applicant's existence and the location of the applicant's headquarters or campus, or if you're relying on your governing board members, the residence of your governing board members during the 2 years prior to the application filing. Such evidence includes copies of corporate charters or articles of incorporation, as well as affidavits to demonstrate that you have been local for 2 years. In the case of tribal applicants, you must be able to certify that the applicant is a tribe and that its tribal lands are within the service area of the proposed LPFM station, or that it's a tribal organization whose controlling tribe has its tribal lands within the service area of the proposed LPFM station. Tribal organizations that have been created by a tribe to apply for an LPFM construction permit does not have to be in existence for 2 years. Finally, you can claim a point as a public safety radio service if you are able to certify that during the 2 years prior to the application, you had jurisdiction within the service area of the proposed LPFM station. For our purposes, we will say we can claim a point as an established nonprofit educational organization. And we'll mark no for the other two. You can also claim a point if you commit to originate at least 8 hours of programming per day. Local origination involves the production of programming by the LPFM licensee within 10 miles of the coordinates of the transmitting attenda. Examples of locally produced programming include licensee-produced call-in shows, broadcasts of events at local schools, or even broadcast events of musical performances at local festivals. I should note that local origination does not include automated programming. It also does not include a local program that has already been broadcast twice, even if it's broadcast on a different day or you make small variations to the program. The FCC will perform random audits to ensure that you adhere to your pledge. For our case, we will say that we will provide local program origination. You can also claim a point if you pledge to maintain a publicly accessible main studio, which has the ability to originate local programming. The main studio must be reachable by telephone and staffed 20 hours per week between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. It must also be located near the transmitting site. If you are claiming this point, you must specify the address and phone number for the proposed main studio location. For our purposes, we will say that we will provide a main studio, and we'll just use the FCC address. You can also get another point if you pledge to both questions number 2 and 3. So if you are committing to local program origination and maintaining a main studio, you can check yes for number 4. For the diversity of ownership point, you must certify that no party to the application holds an attributable interest in any other broadcast station. So Earlier in question 5, we did talk about attributable interest of parties to the application, and we noted that there were some exceptions. Those exceptions only apply to be eligible to apply for the LPFM stations. If you are using one of those exceptions, you cannot qualify for the diversity of ownership point. This point is only applicable if no party to the application has an attributable interest in another broadcast station. For our purposes, we'll say yes. Finally, you can qualify for an additional point if you are a tribe that is proposing to locate the transmitting antenna of the tribal land, or a tribal organization proposing to locate the transmitting antenna site on the tribal land. So the transmitting antenna has to be on the tribal land. And we'll mark no for our purposes here. I should note that you should make sure that all these questions are answered, because you cannot increase your points after the fact. And so if you do not include the points during the application period, you won't be able to change this later on. Even if you qualified for a point, you can't come back after the window closes to say that you qualify for the point. Similarly, you have to provide documentation as to why you qualify for the point. And again, if you don't provide the documentation during the application period, you will not be able to amend the application later. Finally, the final section is involuntary timeshare information. In some cases, even after we've tallied up all the points, there still may be ties. In most cases, those ties can be handled by voluntary timeshare agreements, but in cases where you can't come to a voluntary timeshare agreement, when there is a tie, the FCC will then provide the timeshare agreement. To do so, and to help us do that, we have to know the date that you are an established community presence. So the date that you can qualify your community presence is the date that we'll use to help us figure out what the involuntary timeshare agreement looks like. So in this case, provide the date that you qualify as an established community presence, and be sure to use 4 digits for the year. And you must also certify that you've remained local since that date. So finally, before we get on to the engineering questions, you must certify that all the information you've provided is true and accurate, and you acknowledge that any false statements will be subject to fines or other penalties. In some cases, if you are using a lawyer, the lawyer can also sign on your behalf. So we'll hit validate. Oops. Oh, I did not. So one thing you should remember here is when you do type in your phone number, do not use any dashes or spaces. And now I'll turn it over to Gary, who will take you through the engineering portion.
Thank you very much. As you can see, the work in progress area, as we go back through these sections of pages, shows what we've done. So the last thing on the new section is the Section 6 LPFM engineering. And we'll go to that. And this is the first section is called the tech box, and first entry is the channel. And in the case of my example, Prescott, Arizona. I chose channel 220. Next will be the same as in the example, or your proposed station is your location coordinates in degrees, minutes, and seconds, and once again in the NAD 27 format. Then this question 3 is, if your antenna is going to be mounted on an antenna structure, a telecommunication structure that is registered by the FCC, you would put its structure registration number in the box in number 3. If not, you would click not applicable. Or if you are building a structure and it's going to require FAA notification and resulting in FCC registration, you would click, if you have sent this to the FAA for the aeronautical study, you would click notification. In our case, we're not on a registered structure, so not applicable. The next selection is antenna location site elevation above mean sea level. This is kind of important because this is where we derive your final transmit power and your height above average terrain. So it is the location, the ground level, if you will, at your site, and it is in meters. In this case, I'm going to put 20 meters. Selection 5 is overall tower height above ground. This is the tower height or the structure. It's the highest point of whatever you're mounting your antenna on. And if your antenna is not at the top, if your antenna is at the top, it would be 20. I mean, it would be, in this case, I'm going to make it 20 meters. And the next selection is height of your radiation center above ground, or the height of your antenna above ground. And if your antenna is not on top of the structure, it would be, if it is, it would be 20 meters. In this case, my antenna is 2 meters below the top of the structure, so I'll put in 18 meters. Selection 7 is power and height limitations. By checking yes, you're going to allow us to calculate based on the above information, and that selection has to be yes. If it's no, then it's not going to work. So yes has to be selected for this, and we take that's why the antenna ground level, antenna height is important for us to use to calculate your final station parameters. Then the certifications go to, as part of selecting your channel, you've kind of done the first one, the interference selection. That means you have a channel that doesn't produce any short spacings to other stations, with one exception. If you're using the second adjacent channel waiver procedures, you would select no on this and then give us an exhibit, and the exhibit would show a demonstration of no interference. But normally you would select yes on this. And the next selection is interference to translator or booster input signals. Another certification, and based on engineering work you've done to see if there are any translators in the area of your proposed station, and that you're not interfering with them, or with in this case, more specifically with the input signal to the translator. And the three selections here, yes, no, and not applicable, would be typical. Would be not applicable. If you select no, and that you are interfering, or it looks like you're interfering, you would select no and give us an exhibit, press an exhibit. Also, if you select yes, yes means you're saying there's a translator in the area, but we are not interfering with it. So even with yes, you would have to submit an exhibit. So typical would be not applicable. Next selection, channel TV6 interference. Another set of rules that require you to analyze your location and any possible TV6 channel TV6 stations that are in the area. There are distance requirements to those stations, and if you comply to that, you click not applicable also. Similar to the question before, if there's no or yes, you would give us an exhibit and tell us why there's no interference, and or yes if there is a TV station there but you're not interfering. Selection 10 is the National Environmental Policy Act. This relates to multiple environmental concerns, and the worksheets in the instructions for the Form 318. There are not worksheets for the general environmental selections or the RF exposure selections. So the Form 301 broadcast application contains those worksheets, and the specifically for the low power FM stations, we're working on a RF exposure worksheet, which will be out shortly to assist. The worksheet for the RF issues on the Form 301 are quite extensive and go a little bit beyond what a low power applicant would need to do. So we'll be having those coming out, and using the worksheets or using a consultant that does this kind of work, you would certify that you comply to the National Environmental Policy Act. And if you don't, so you would select yes normally. If you don't, you select no, then the exhibit would be required, and that exhibit is what they call an environmental assessment, and that is something you would have to supply, which is a more detailed environmental review, and then we would take it from there. And then finally, similar to the certification in the legal section, the preparer certification is whoever certifies it's usually an engineer. It could be an engineer, but it could be the applicant. There's no requirement. And putting in just any old thing here for an example, and then we'll be giving it over to Conrad. And once again, I think Perul did the telephone number is all the digits put together, no parentheses, dashes, or spaces, or else the sheet will it'll check and tell you that. So that's kind of a convention that the form needs. Email address is optional. It stops me. It says this item is required.
I'm trying to think what item it's going to refer to.
Oh, the date. The date. I'm sorry. The date. Yeah. This is a good example of. I tried to validate this, and it says this item is required. The cursor on the application will flash to the area where it's required, and of course I left out the date. So
and if I could just add, while Gary's doing that, that's the format that Gary's using that's required when you're plugging in the date. It has the forward slashes between the month, date, and then, as Powell mentioned earlier, all 4 digits of the year.
And validate. Validate. Go back to the bottom of this section, the engineering section. Click menu, and that takes us back to the main page, and Conrad will finish out the form for us.
And then this menu page reflects the progress that's taken place. You'll see that each section of the application is identified in terms of its status as valid. That's a good sign. What you want to do at this point in order to file, we're actually going to do a test filing, is to return to the main menu page, at the bottom of which you will see the application that you've been working on. We're going to select that particular application. That's fairly easy with just one here. And we're going to click where it says test file. Actually, I'm going to do one other thing before we do that. Just want to point out that if you want to, before you're either doing your test filing or filing itself, you can also go to where it says print form over here, print form, and what it will do, it will print out the entire form. Sometimes folks work better actually having a hard copy in front of them and so forth, and it gives you the entire form in one presentation. But we're going to go ahead and click where it does test file, and it will ask, are you sure you want to run the validation form? And we're going to say OK. And there were a couple of points during Parl's presentations that she pointed out. Well, we'll see if there'll be any errors. The first item here is is making reference to the FCC registration number. The FCC registration number is established to keep track of payments, but it's also for verification purposes, and it's on that basis that non-commercial applicants, like the low-power applicants, are required to provide an FRN. It makes sure that the folks that are filing the application are indeed those very same folks. The next error message after that indicates low-power FM applications for new facilities, of which this is one, must be filed during an open window. Obviously, if one were to file this application before the window actually opens, the application would not be allowed to be filed. It's not going to be until October 15th that would be the situation, so you have to wait, obviously, until then. Section 2, question 2, if A or B is answered yes, exhibit must be submitted. I'm trying to recall what section, what the particular... well, actually what we can do, as I try to recall that, we can click on this little blue dot. It should take us back to that area. Again, that's section 2, question 2, and I think that was a question that Parl deliberately had answered that way, so that we wanted to do as a test whether or not that would trigger the error message. So you have to go back to that and then actually respond to that question similarly, and respond with an exhibit. And then section 3, question 1A, parallel to that, again, it's taking you back. Here's 1A, and exhibit 10 would need to be filled in. So, and in terms of the FRN, which is, it's a tedious process, but one can make reference to the low-power FM links that have already been identified. And I can't think of anything else at this point beyond... Well, we could do the FRN. It'll take about another 10 minutes if we want to go through that process. Okay. I'm getting the heads up that we do. All right, so let's see. See, it's even telling me if you haven't selected a form, it's telling me I haven't selected a form. So now I've done just that. Go back to the test file once again. Let's click on the blue dot that represents the error message regarding the FRN. Again, that's short for FCC registration number. There's so many acronyms. But nonetheless, everyone needs to register and establish an FCC registration number. Let's see if we can do this quickly. And then I know we have a number of questions that have come in as well. I'm not sure why this is taking this length of time, but what we're going to do, we're going to go back to the first section of the application. At the bottom of that first section, it won't say section 1, it identifies it as the form number, in this case FCC 318. At the bottom of that page, you will see a rectangular box identified with the words Edit FRN. Let's click on where it says Edit FRN. If we had that information already, we would plug it in here, but we don't. So what we're going to do, as it says, if you need more FRN info or don't have an FRN, click on this CORS homepage. CORS is the Commission Registration Service. They administer the FRNs. And we'll click on where it says register. Okay. And then are you registering as a business or as an individual? In this case, again, we pointed out early in the process that you're not going to be filing this as an individual, and for the purpose of this registration, we're going to identify this as a business. Is your contact address within the United States or its territories? Yes, and we'll continue. And this could be a number of different options. Let's say it's a state or local agency, and the subtype is state. Let's say it's with public safety. And we'll stick with what I started with. Okay. Now, it then goes into a question that if your business has an employer identification number or taxpayer identification number, enter it here. If your business does not have an employer identification number, select a reason. There will be a number of times when you won't have either the employer identification number or the taxpayer identification number, in which case you would go to the second option here. For the purpose of finishing this up, let's go with this. And for the purpose of it not being applicable, we'll say exempted activities. Again, the organization, some of this is a bit of an instant replay. And we're all very power hungry, so we're all presidents. No. All right. We're almost there. All right, the password, it tells you basically what the parameters are. It's 6 to 15 characters. Again, case sensitive as it was in terms of setting up the password for the CDBS account number. And then it gives you a link for different suggestions. But generally, it will require at least one capital letter and one numeral. Personal security question, I will just say city of birth, and I was just there this weekend. I guess I'm not supposed to tell you what that is. But it was Yonkers, New York, okay. Okay, now what's happened is through the registration process, the FRN number has been established for you. Again, in some secure but accessible spot. Preserve that so that, again, you can easily access that. Because anytime you file an application, when you amend an application with the low power application, you're going to need this FRN. So both the FRN and its password, and I'm just going to go back. Now we can plug in the FRN. I have to remember the password. Okay, and then we'll return, and we're back at the application. Again, we'll validate. The validating is parallel to the glue that keeps everything together. We'll click on menu, and then once again, after menu, we'll return to the main menu. We'll slide down, we'll select the application, and if nothing else, there'll be one fewer error message that's reflected, and that will be, there will not be the FRN error message that we got before. Once again, we'll say OK as to whether or not we want to proceed. Great. All right, the FRN error message is no longer there. So at least in terms of the FRN, that's been addressed, but the other questions, in order for the application to be filed, those would need to be addressed.
Thanks, Conrad. So we've gone through the application, and so what happens once you've filed the application, and what happens after the close of the filing window? So one thing I would point out is please try to apply early. You can right now fill out the application. You can't file it until the filing window. So feel free to start filling out your applications right away. And also, I would recommend applying early on in the window. So if there are error messages, you have time to fix those errors. Applications that are not filed prior to the close of the window will not be considered. So what happens once the window closes? Applications that don't conflict with each other and they meet all other requirements will be processed within a few months from the filing. Conflicting applications will have an opportunity to propose a settlement, and that includes technical amendments that would allow you to get out of the conflict or move to another station or another area. If no settlement is proposed, the Bureau will use the point system to select among conflicting applications. And in cases where the point system results in a tie, the tied selectees will have an opportunity to first enter into a voluntary timeshare agreement. Otherwise, the Bureau itself will determine the hours of operation for each selectee in the group, and that's the involuntary timeshare agreement. So at this point, we'll take as many questions as we can. I should also point out the PowerPoint will be made available, which also has all the links or some of the helpful links for the application process, such as the public notice, direct link to the channel finder, a link to frequently asked questions, a direct link to CDBS, as well as Form 318. And now we will take some questions and answers, or we'll provide answers. And again, LPFM at FCC.gov or hashtag LPFM questions. So we're getting a lot of questions. I think we'll do as many as we can in the next half hour. Otherwise, we will respond individually or on Twitter to questions that we cannot get to today or questions that may need some more follow-up. So I guess I'll take one question. The one question we got was, what does it mean under the character section to have any adverse findings? Basically, this means if you've been found or convicted of a crime, that's an adverse finding. So essentially, if you have been convicted or found guilty of a crime, you would want to report that on your application. You want to take the next one?
I have a question. There are some large radio markets with FCC identified points where the LPFM can apply for second adjacent waiver. Please explain how these markets are different from the usual second adjacent waiver method. There's really no difference. The second adjacent waiver rule is in place, and it can be used pretty much by anybody anywhere, so you don't have to be in a market or anywhere. It is available now for all applicants.
We have one question. Since public safety organizations can hold an unlimited number of LPFM licenses, what constitutes a public safety organization? So to qualify under that criteria, you must be either a state or local government or a non-government entity. You have to be organized as a not-for-profit. And you have to provide a service that is to protect safety of life, health, or property, services such as weather warnings or traffic. So it has to be to protect the safety of life, health, or property. And you cannot commercially sell your services. Go ahead.
The FCC, with the majority of 156 Arbitron markets showing only second adjacent channels available, what calculations for DDU will you accept? What we're using for the demonstration of no interference on second adjacent waivers is similar to what's used for the translator stations, and it's been used for quite a few years. It's based on the living way precedents, and that's what we would accept, and as a demonstration of no interference. So that's kind of the methodology. Although the rule states proof of no interference, so we can't restrict it to one methodology. So if it's something different than that, then we would have to evaluate it.
Next question, is advertising permitted? And if so, what form can it take? The LPFM service is a non-commercial service, so no advertising, no commercial advertising is permitted.
I didn't hear that question. I'm trying to listen to the questions too and do the other ones. This question, an engineering consultant, it's three questions. An engineering consultant informed of our company that he has a program other than NAD 27 that will identify the best channel or dial. How true is this? We see a lot of programs, a lot of software that people use to show that the station complies to the proper spacing rules, and as long as you're confident that works, there's no one answer for one program. The NAD 27 program is, I don't really understand that. The NAD 27 refers to the how we want the coordinates for the station displayed, and but either way, it's if the program the engineer, the consultant is using does show that everything complies, and we verify that, then it will work. The second question on this is, what is a translator? A translator is a station that retransmits the programming of another station, and it doesn't originate any programming. It just takes the signal and makes it available through a blockage of a mountain or to beef up the station's signal in its service area, and it basically, that's all it does. It just repeats the signal of the main station. The third question, web pages are not clear while being viewed on this end. I agree, because I'm watching on our large monitors here, and it's partly because of the 318 form is kind of packed in, and it's gray colored, and we really don't have any control of that. The best thing I would recommend is to print out the PDF of the form and review the instructions in the form, because that's pretty much everything we've gone through today, and then replay this webinar with the form in your hand. That might help out, but I don't think we'll be able to make these forms any larger.
All right, the next question is from Jerry Wayne Newson. He's a senior at Ferris State University. The question he raises is, how would registering for a low-power FM license apply to a university? I'm applying for Bulldog Radio, a registered student organization on campus. Thanks. I would imagine that the organization, Bulldog Radio, would need to coordinate and collaborate with either the university's communications department or with an appropriate administrative element within the university, so that you're doing this in concert with the university. There are some other aspects of this that I might, if Pearl will be open to asking, because there was an area when you were going through the different legal aspects of the application where this comes into play.
So as we talked earlier, there are some relevant questions that you should ask or you should be thinking about if you are a university. One is, if you're part of a large university, you have to see if the large university already has a broadcast station. So that's one thing you have to consider. You're not automatically disqualified, but you do have to consider whether or not the large university already has a station, in which case the local chapter of the university can apply, as long as you're separately incorporated and you have a separate local mission that you can qualify for. So that's the one thing that you should consider. The other aspect you should consider is if the university has a broadcast station, a full power station, and it's not being run by students, you can still apply for the LPFM station as long as the LPFM station will be run and managed by students.
Conrad, you out?
Yeah, I've got a couple of quickies. One is the actual physical process of going through the application. Does each section have to be completed before proceeding to the next section? No. But it's important that in making the transition from one section to the next, in order to assure yourself that you've retained the information you've plugged in, that you validate that respective section. While preparing the form, can you return or skip to each section to make changes? Again, really very much the same answer. Just key point is to validate. And then a second quick question, how do we submit our articles of incorporation? When we hit the exhibit button, are we given a browse upload box to attach them to our application? Yes. When you want to submit, for example, the articles of incorporation, you need to scan that document, and in the process converting it to a PDF document. And when you are in that exhibit, there will be provided to you an opportunity for you to upload that attachment.
The question I have here, can applicants use a half-wave spaced antenna to reduce downward RF radiation from rooftop antenna installations? How would an applicant show that RF exposure would be within acceptable limits? This is a certification that you put on the application, and if you want to provide exhibits of how you did that, you're more than welcome to. There's many ways to do this. You can use the worksheets. There's a program called FM Model. You can use that. Or if the limit is, if the calculations are over the limit, you can show mitigation steps that you'll take, such as access control, signage, safety plans, and things like that. So, but you basically certify in the application that the site complies, and you don't necessarily have to submit anything, although you can if you'd like to.
Yep. Next question. In the point system section to claim a point for the main studio, what location do we put on the application if the CP application is not approved yet? So that question is regarding your proposed main studio site. So you should put an address, put the address as to the proposed main studio site.
Insurance. Okay, I could try it. But I have a question. Let's see. The question, Section 6, LPFM, Question 10, National Environmental Policy Act, worksheets. Let me see a lot. What the worksheets are in PDF. Oh, okay. Well, I think I answered that. When will a PDF version of worksheets 2 and 3 be available? Like I said, the Form 301, you can go there now and use the worksheets for the general environmental. The RF worksheet is available also, but it's quite a bit more complicated than what we would require. So we're working on a RF worksheet for the low power FM applicants, so stay tuned. And these worksheets are just that, they're worksheets. We don't require that they be attached to your application, and it's not even required that you retain them, but the fact that you certified that the environmental was okay, it would behoove you to maybe keep the work you've done, or if a consultant did it, keep a file.
I have a question. So could individual schools being in the same district have their own stations? And I think this goes back to the question earlier that Conrad began to answer. I think you have to consider I think you have to consider if I think this question is related to if you're part of a larger organization, in which case the main thing you have to consider is whether or not you're separately incorporated and you have a separate mission from the national organization. And so I think that's what this question is referring to. If I haven't answered your question, you can respond back and we'll try to get back to you. But again, I think the relevant issue here is whether or not you're separately incorporated from the larger organization and you have a separate mission, separate local and distinct local mission from the national organization.
I have a question. The question is, I don't understand where we use the FRN on the application. I take it that it's different from the CDBS registration. It is different than the CDBS registration. The CDBS registration is setting up the account that you'll use to actually file the application. The FRN is, again, that's short for FCC registration number, and that is just to verify that the parties that are involved in the application are actually filing that application, and it is something that you can do actually near the beginning of the process on that first section 1 of the application. Again, it's that edit FRN option you have on section 1, or in filing the application. If everything else is perfect, you will get that FRN message. It will take you back to that link that we went through before. But yes, definitely different. One enables you to actually file the application, but it's like the penultimate or the last stop in the process, so that we know that we're getting a verified application from a verified applicant. That's the FRN.
I'm applying for a 6 kilowatt full power non-commercial station. What application should I use to apply for a new station? It's the application form would be the 301 broadcast application, but you would have to wait for a filing window to open up. The reason we're here today for the Form 318 and the low power FM station is for the upcoming low power FM filing window. So for this station, you would have to wait until we announce an upcoming filing window.
Next question. Please provide an example of the detailed descriptions of the nature of their proposed station programming mentioned on page 3 of the instructions. There's a separate description for each program required. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer to this question, but what we would like to see is as much detail as possible that you can give regarding the programming that you'll be providing. So, for example, if you're going to be providing environmental type programming, detailed description of what that type of programming would be. So again, there's not a right or wrong answer, but we do want evidence that you are going to be providing educational programming, and that's what this is geared to. Again, no right or wrong answer, but as much detail as you can provide regarding the programming that you're proposing would be helpful.
Anything? Okay. If two organizations want a channel in the same area with multiple channels available, can one organization amend the application for the alternate channel? Well, you wouldn't know that until the filing window closed and we came out with a list of stations that were mutually exclusive. So once you did that and you found out that you would have an opportunity to do an amendment to get out of the multiple exclusive arrangement, and one of those could be changing channels. So the answer is yes.
Next question, can you give more detail on the ability to show community presence? So this is related to the point system factors that we would consider. One is the community presence, and here you want to provide information that proves that you were present in the community for at least 2 years. And so you can do that by showing, articles of incorporation, whatever information that you can provide to establish that you have been in that community for 2 years. In some cases, you may be relying on the fact that you have board members who are local to that community for 2 years. In those cases, you can provide affidavits saying that they have been local for 2 years. So this is whatever information that you can provide that provides evidence that you have been local in the community for at least 2 years. If you haven't looked at the instructions to the form, that also gives you more detail about what you could show, but that essentially you want evidence to show that you were there for 2 years. And again, page 8 of the instructions of the application also provides you information.
Okay, I have a question regarding, again, kind of starting and stopping. The question is, do I understand correctly that we can partially fill out Form 318 CDBS account using Validate to Save, then come back a few days later and finish the form? Definitely. So you don't need to feel as if you have to complete the whole process in one step, and then that allows you to do a number of things that both Powell and Gary have mentioned, so that if there's more information that you still need to secure, you have the opportunity to do that and then be in a better position to complete and file a complete form.
A question from Karen Gaskin is a little confusing. Three or four questions. I'm going to take the last question right off the bat. Question 4, antenna site elevation. Where to get information that is acceptable to FCC? We require your heights to be within 1 meter, and how you do that is up to you. We don't require any certification by any particular body, but a surveyor can certainly give you that accuracy. Topo maps. The USGS has elevation tools on their websites, and like I said, all we're looking for is accuracy within 1 meter. The other parts of your question, Karen, parties to application. Question 4, percentage of votes. Question 5, percentage of assets and debt. I don't know what the question is, so I think Pearl maybe covered that when she was explaining the votes and the assets. They're really up to the organization, and since it's a new station, there should be no assets, should be zero, and percentage of votes can be whatever the applicant deems by how their organization is operated.
Right, and
So.
if you can specify a little bit more, we can try to maybe provide a better answer.
That's Karen.
Next question. If a person previously has been found to be operating a translator outside the FCC rules and has had an adverse finding, will that individual be prohibited from filing for an LPFM? I believe the answer is yes, you will be prohibited from filing for an LPFM. No?
Does this question say translator?
Translator.
Or pirate station?
It says translator.
They wouldn't be prohibited.
If they've been operating outside of the FCC rules.
That would be an adverse findings exhibit that they would need to submit.
Right.
But there's no outright prohibition.
Okay, so there is no outright prohibition. You will have to provide information about the adverse finding in. There is a question on the application that asks if there's been any adverse findings. So you will have to disclose that in the question, but there is no outright prohibition. And the other thing I should point out, you do say if a person and whether or not the individual. Just a reminder that LPFMs, you cannot as an individual apply for an LPFM. You have to be an organization, a nonprofit organization.
The Google Earth is a useful tool, but uses WGS84 or 84 API datum. Attempts to add 27 results in discrepancies of 20 to 30 feet. How much wiggle room do you allow with coordinates up to 3 seconds? We require the coordinates to be in N8027, as I said, and within 1 second of latitude and longitude. So that's why it's important to convert your WGS84 and any other coordinates and any other datum that you have into the N8027, and you should be good to go.
So next question, if our organization is in the process of receiving state designation as a nonprofit, are you still eligible to apply? Right, that's what I thought. So you have to have had, your designation has to have come in by the date that you apply. So as of the date that you're applying, if you are recognized by the state as a nonprofit, then you can apply. If you haven't received the designation by the date of application, you will not be eligible to apply.
You got one comment?
No, I don't.
Okay, I've got one. An antenna question. Is the height of antenna radiation center above ground level measured from the ground to the bottom of the antenna? No, it's from the ground to the center of the antenna. So if it's a single element antenna, you're going to still be the center. If it's a multiple antenna array, it would be in the middle of that array. So the answer is to the center. Another question is pertaining to our form that's being put on the television screens, and we're seeing the same thing. We're kind of lucky we can look right on the computer, but on our big monitors, it's not real clear. It's basically the form is as I said before, pretty packed tightly, and the best thing to do is to look at the PDF of the form and go through this again, and I think you'll see it clearer. And also the instructions in the front of the form are very, very good to go through the sections also. Oh yeah, all the FCC forms can go in the Media Bureau Forms page, and the quickest way I do it is go to Google and search Media Bureau Forms page. It's usually the first selection that comes up. You go to the Media Bureau Forms page and scroll down to whatever form you want, but in this case, we also have it on the links, on our helpful links on the PowerPoint presentation. And you find Form 318, and to the right there's a link that says PDF, and click on the PDF, and that will bring up a nice, clear PDF version, which you can view on your screen, or you can print out, and that'll take care of that. Once again, we apologize for that. Just seems to be the characteristic of the form. It's not made for broadcast television.
One quick thing,
Go ahead, Conrad.
another helpful tool in terms of accessing both the instructions as well as the worksheet. If on the electronic form on the front page at the very bottom, there is a link that will take you right to both the instructions and the worksheet.
Next question. For a local community applicant, must 50% of the board have to live near the headquarters of the nonprofit? So, I mean, there's a couple of ways that you could, and I think this is question for community-based criteria. If you are physically headquartered or have a campus within, for the top 50 urban markets, 10 miles of the transmitting antenna site, or 20 miles if you're outside of the top 50. If you're local because you're physically headquartered within the proper mileage of the transmitting antenna site, then you don't have to have the board members living near the headquarters of the nonprofit. On the other hand, if you are relying on the members of your board to qualify as a local applicant, then you have to have 75%. So it could be one or the other. It doesn't have to be both.
Are LPFM stations able to apply for HD licensing? There's no restrictions that I know of, although the licensing does cost some money, so the traditional operating expense of low-power stations may not allow that. So I would advise you to check with the licensing authority for HD radio and then make an economic decision. But there's no restrictions as far as we go. The station can do that.
Can the station be run under a name which is different than the name used on the application? Can there be a station name? The answer is yes. The station can be run under a name which is different than the name used on the application.
What is the difference between a low-power FM station and a full-power station used for non-commercial educational purposes? Operationally, there really isn't any difference. The only difference is that low-power station is restricted to 100 watts of effective radiative power at 30 meters of antenna height above average terrain. And there are a few other small differences, but a low-power FM station is considered a non-commercial educational station.
Next question is, Prometheus has impressed on us the importance of a letter of assurance from the antenna's tower structure owner if we don't own it ourselves. Where would we submit that, or do we need to the FCC? You don't need that, right? You don't need site assurance? Oh, you do? Oh. You don't need to, so you do need site assurance, but you don't need to submit it, but you have to keep it in the files.
Regarding question 8B, interference to translator or booster, is there an easy way or database that the LPFM applicant can use to find input frequencies for transmitters? If not, can the FCC provide a database on their website? The information is supposed to be in the translator's licensing information, and it will say what station it is translating, what the input frequency is. So that's where you would find that information. Although the information, especially on older translator stations that have switched multiple times, their primary stations may not be accurate. So as we speak today, there's no precise database of this, and it's going to just take a little bit of extra work on everybody's part to make that determination. That's if the input frequency is not correct in the translator's license information. I can do another one, yes. The question is, my question to the signal finder, the only open space is within the state, but a good distance away because we are in a congested market. What is the maximum distance the antenna can be located from the main studio? Are there any exceptions for educational station in underserved community? I think the main studio, there's really no distinction in low power service for the main studio. It would be the campus of the organization or the entity, or the board members' addresses. That's the criteria we look for the folks being close to the transmitter. But we really don't have a specific main studio requirement. So I really don't know how to answer that, other than saying that. It sounds like we want to have the main studio way far away from the transmitter site, which doesn't sound like it would be allowed.
According to the rules for locally originated programming, would it be permissible to, in the course of a 24-hour day, air 8 hours of straight original programming, then repeat the 8-hour block of programming twice? So the short answer is no. You cannot repeat a program more than 2 times. So that's the hardline rule. So you can't. So this makes it sound like you would repeat the programming for three times, and the general answer is you cannot repeat programming more than 2 times. Right. So clarification. This is in relation to whether or not you can get a point for locally originated programming, and so you wouldn't be able to qualify for a point if you did, as suggested here, 8 hours of straight original programming for three times in a row. So this is in relation to whether or not you can qualify for the point. So while you can provide programming this way, you cannot qualify for the local program origination point.
Okay. Our proposed site is next to a large bay which is at sea level. This will cause our hat that height above average terrain to be considerably lower than if the calculations were made over land. Can any adjustment be made to the hat in this case? No, we take the height above average terrain based on your location. So it is what it is, and it does put some folks at disadvantage that are in this situation, or maybe in a mountainous area where the hat could be either extremely high or low. But that's how we do it, and we can't adjust the hat. We can't adjust Mother Nature, I guess, is what the answer is. The hat is what it is based on your geography.
Next question, can the board members for the LPFM station be just a percentage of the full organizational board for the organization? How will this affect the percentage of votes question? For example, let's say that only 3 of the 9 of our board members are involved in the radio station. So I think you have to list all the board members in the application, even if they're not going to be involved in the radio station, because they would be considered a party to the application. So even though all your board members may not be involved in the radio station, you will have to list them in the application.
You will be receiving hundreds of urban applications requiring second adjacent waivers. How does an applicant prove that its antenna is X meters from occupied buildings or 4-lane highways? What about churches with high cathedral ceilings, skyscrapers with only mechanical equipment on the top floor, and the overlap includes these spaces? That's when you submit your demonstration of no interference. That's the kind of particulars that, this would be a case-by-case. I can't answer one answer for every situation, so it sounds like we would look at your particular application, and if you say there's no interference and we agree, then that should work. When you get into situations like that, it's pretty much case-by-case. So my recommendation is to go ahead and submit it, and we'll take a look at it.
Next question is Organization A, founded in 1960, merges in 1980 with B, that was founded in 1970, with B surviving. In 2000, the organization changes name and address. Can the surviving organization claim 1960 as its local founding date in the case of mutually exclusive timeshare situations? So the answer here is no. It has to be the surviving organization, which seems to be 2000. So you can't trace back to the 1960 date.
Are we able to input more than one location coordinate for the channel finder, and are we able to submit more than one dial on the application? The channel finder, you can check any unlimited amount of coordinates. That's a tool. That's a search tool, if you will. But on the application itself, you can only submit one location and one frequency. Maybe. Is the new window a good time to make major modifications to an already licensed LP100 station? Where is that info at? Yes, you can. You can make this is the time to make a major modification to a licensed station. I don't know specifically what major modification you want to make, but one of the ones that we see is frequency or distance. So if you're trying to move the station or in frequency, the distance or the channel, that you can do that. Other than that, and then there are other major changes that have to do with the entity that makes up the station. That could also be done. Where the info is at, I'm not really sure where to point you, other than to the rules. the rules, I believe 73.870 distinctifies between minor and major modifications, so you might want to look at 73.870. I hope I'm correct on that. Am I correct on that? You just stated that an LPFM antenna can only be 30 meters of antenna height above average terrain, so I assume an antenna could not be on top of a building over 100 feet high. Where can I find this information? The parameters for a low-power FM station is 100 watts effective radiated power and 30 meters of antenna height above average terrain, and that's a benchmark. So if your antenna goes higher, we just adjust the transmit power lower. So you can be on a 100-foot building or 100-meter building. It doesn't matter. It's just that's where we start when we calculate. So we would have to see what your hat is at that location, and then we would calculate your effective radiated power. But there's no restrictions. We're not saying you have to be 30 meters. You can be higher or lower, and there's stations all over that depart from that. If a frequency is available for a given city, do the transmitter and studio have to be within the city limits? No, there's no. Here again, the studio requirements for low-power FM stations, they're not specific. So the answer is no. There's no requirement. Okay, I'm going to do two more, and then we have to come to an end. We'll address everybody's questions, and even some of the ones that we addressed. I've made notes to that. I'm going to. Some folks have some telephone numbers and stuff, and I'll get back with clarifications because some of our answers are quick answers, and it may not be completely satisfied. So we'll do a couple more here, and then that'll be the end. Can spacing rules between two consenting applicants be waived? Only one channel for two communities separated by a mountain. No, not generally, not necessarily, because we don't allow stations to agree to interference or spacing conflicts. So generally, we don't do that. And I guess this will be the last one. Will this be the best one? Can you rent space in an antenna from a near building? And the answer is yes. If they sell the space, it gets back to site assurance, and people all over the place rent locations for antennas. So there's no restriction. We don't. That's just a transaction between you and the person that owns the location. If you want to put your antenna on their building. And we have a lot more questions. We'll get to them, but I think we're coming to an end.
Yep. So thank you for attending our LPFM webinar. Thank you for your patience. We were a little delayed today. And as Gary said, we do have more questions, and we will answer those. We don't have time to answer them today, but we will get back to you. One of us will get back to you with an answer to the question that you have if it hasn't been answered. And in some cases, we may even call you if we feel like we need further clarification. Again, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.